Yeah, 40 years in 12 minutes. We can do this. This is not a problem. Yeah, I've been writing for 40 years and ghosting for about 30 years. And so it occurred to me recently that I've seen a lot of changes in publishing. Publishing was basically, when I started, publishing was as it had been for a couple of hundred years, and now it's really different. And it sort of occurred to me, because when I talked to young people, they couldn't believe that, all the old cliches that I used to use, Tipex and, all those sort of things. And so actually, it probably is quite interesting, this journey. And people had always said, when I talked about my various experiences ghostwriting, people say, oh, you must write a book. And I would say, no, I'm never going to write a book. Much better to hide behind other people. But then I suddenly thought, actually, maybe I could. And I came up with the idea of just telling it in anecdotes. Every chapter is the most 2 or 3 pages of anecdotes. And that's sort of got me out of having to do anything I didn't really want to do. So what are the changes that we've seen? I think at the moment, when I started, I didn't know that ghostwriters existed because it was a secret. Publishers honestly believed that they shouldn't admit that anybody didn't write their own book. They thought the public, and maybe the public was this thick, they thought the public was so thick they actually believed that of an evening Joan Collins or Sagittaire Escritoire or David Beckham came home after a hard day's work and said, "Spy Starling, I just going to dash off a couple of thousand words." And so gradually, thanks to people like Bex, who has never pretended that he writes his own books, bless, and Katie Price obviously doesn't do her own typing, as she puts it. It's sort of now okay to say that, it's because it's just so silly to think. It actually takes a lot of practice to write a book. You've got to put in a lot of hours. Sometimes it's quite boring. And the sort of people who write the really popular books are usually doing something else, like they're famous politicians, footballers, actors or whatever. So it really isn't realistic to think they're going to write the books. So when I started, I just stumbled across ghosting. I would say now that I know more about how the whole thing works, I would say 50% of the non-fiction that you see in the shops is ghostwritten. And I would say about 10 to 20% of the fiction is ghostwritten. And in the old days, it was edited really heavily. You sent in a manuscript, like William Golding's book was almost completely rewritten. Lord of the Flies was all about, there was a nuclear explosion at the beginning of it originally, and the editor said, well, that's boring, and get straight to the island and rewrote the whole thing. He basically did what a ghost did. Publishers now can't afford editors, except some very rich publishers, and so what they do now is they want to get books in as near to perfect as they can. So they're much happier if a ghostwriter is involved who they know already. They know that they do nothing else but write books, so they're going to get it on time. It's going to be written grammatically, etc. So I would say my contention, having been told that I was once on that Today program, which is one of my pet hates, John Humphreys and co. They'd found a professor who was going to pontificate about put the other side, and they talked to the professor first. He's one of the well-known literary gentlemen, and Humphreys asked him what he thought of it, and he actually said, well, ghostwriting isn't actually a capital crime, which I thought was very encouraging. I was actually going to live through the experience, but generally we're considered, as the previous speaker said, pond life. And so the fact that actually I think ghostwriting is a good thing, because I would contend that if Beckham had written his own book, I love him, but it would be a hard read, or maybe a very short read. I think that on a more serious note, the other thing is I had a really particularly as a ghostwriter, you can't have too many opinions, because it's their opinions that matter. So one of the skills is you keep really quiet and you just egg them on to say more and more outrageous things. And somebody contacted me the other day who was truly pond life. I won't say what he was in case any of you share the same pond, but he was truly pond life, but I thought really quite interesting. Although it is, a long, long way from my own political views, I thought, well, that's interesting. How did he get to be in the, at that end of the spectrum? And so I came breezing out of my office saying to my wife, you never believe who's just rung, or whatever he'd done. And she looked at me through narrowed eyes, which, as my children will tell you, is always a dangerous time. And she said, "Is there absolutely nothing you wouldn't do for money?" And I thought, well, is this, you know? But actually, when that challenged me, so I had to then come up with a defence. And I think that actually, just like freedom of speech, everybody has a right to write a book. And so if they can't write it, they have a right, just as they have a right to hire a barrister if they murder somebody, they have a right to hire a ghostwriter to put their side of the story. People can argue later once the book is out. And what I like, because I'm, as you may have guessed from my general demeanour, I am middle class, and I come from a very, very sheltered little bubble, and so I love the extremes. So I like to go to the bottom of the pile. I wrote an awful lot of books about child abuse and all that side, which I found really, really fascinating. I'm a sucker for a brothel, but at the other end, I really like hanging out with very, very rich people and going to palaces and things. And what I enjoy is if you can meet the bonded labourers and you can meet the dictators, you sort of get an idea of how it all works. And that is part of the joy for me of being a ghostwriter. But I think also it's why we should write the books, because all these people, you can't, if I can just be a tiny bit serious, because child abuse is not, funny. Nobody would buy these child abuse stories at the beginning, because, honest to God, 10 years ago, nobody in publishing believed it was true. You'd go to them with these stories about things that were happening to children. They say, I don't really think so. I think it's a social worker's made it up and put it in The Guardian. It's not true. It's not really happening. And by getting these, and I kept saying to them, these are perfect little stories. You've got perfect heroes and heroines in the form of a child, because the child is innocent. A child cannot do wrong. You've got perfect villains, because you have the abusers. And if the child triumphs over the villain, and in most of these books, the abuser ends up in court or in prison or something. So you have a redemption at the end. These are perfect Greek myths. Oh no, they couldn't do it. And then when Dave Peltzer wrote A Child Called It, and probably should have used a ghostwriter, he sold trillions and trillions of copies, and suddenly publishers were all ringing up. I'd been around with a lot of these, well, they weren't kids by the time they got to me, and I actually had 3 of the big publishing houses ring on the same day, because I'd had the first book that I managed to get out, the thing called The Kid, had been #1 in the Sunday Times for weeks and weeks and weeks. And 3 publishers came out on the same afternoon and rang me and said, we've been in editorial meetings and our managing director wants to know why we haven't got an abuse book. Have you still got that one? I had hundreds of them. I had mountains. And so for a while they flooded the market. But I think they did a really, really good job. I think they shed light on people who were not allowed to tell their story. The whole point of these abuse stories is that these children are frightened into silence. They're threatened into silence. They're told that, Mummy won't love you anymore, or they'll come and take you away, and all the things that if you ever talk. And the fact that people would actually listen to their stories, and now maybe the whole thing's run a little amok, and it's gone a little bit too far and become a witch hunt, but that is better than what was going on before, I would say. Am I all right? So to lighten the mood again a little, somebody told me Cliff Richard's been pulled in. Is that right? Whoa. It's the end of the 60s, isn't it? Yes. Some of these books are blockbusters. We know we always want to sell billions of copies. Sometimes now, because of the changes in publishing, you can just publish 1 copy. I had a guy, quite a wealthy man the other day, and he came to me. He said, what I want to happen is when my grandchild, who is just really, really tiny, when he asks Mummy in 20, 30 years' time, how did Grandad actually make his money? What did he do? Because nobody's interested when they're a child. I want to be able to say, her to be able to say, go to the library. He was the sort of bloke to have a library in the house. It wouldn't be in the... go to the library, and there's the autobiography on that. And actually, that's all books have to do. They only have to appeal to 1 or 2 people. And we've seen with the growth of Ancestry.com and all those Who Do You Think You Are programs and things, people are fascinated by their own families. And so there's a real job for ghostwriters there as well, I think. And I'm such a fan of Amazon. There's this big row going on at the moment between Hachette and Amazon, and some writers are siding with one and some with the other. I am totally with Amazon. Who said that excuse me, publishers, but who said that publishers were the good guys and that they were on our side? They've never been on our side until suddenly Amazon comes along, and now that it's just they're exactly the same. They're two gigantic companies, but Amazon has so moved the game forward. They've completely changed. Nobody can hardly remember what book selling was like before Amazon. It was it was just dreary. So there you go. Am I anywhere near the end of my 12 minutes? I've got 1 minute left. I've got, how many years have I left out? Celebrities are fun. Let's talk about celebrities. I'll tell you about one. There's two. For the older members of the audience, Gillian Tailforth. Who remembers Gillian Tailforth? Yeah, older members of the audience. The only younger members of the audience only know Gillian Tailforth if they studied law, because she's now a legal case. Gillian was interesting. She was one of the first people in EastEnders, for those who don't remember, and everybody loved her. She's very lovable. She's an East End girl. And she got a boyfriend who the press didn't like so much. And there was some sort of incident in a Range Rover on a motorway that the Sun reported, and the boyfriend egged, and it was pulled out of the papers almost immediately. But the boyfriend egged her on to go to court to sue Rupert Murdoch. This is a girl who just started an acting career in a soap opera, who on the day that she was hired, the day she auditioned, was told, if you get this part, by this time next year, you will be a household name. That was all the PR training she got. Can you imagine anybody allowing anyone close to Bette Midler or Lauren Bacall at that time? They would have had phalanxes of PRs helping them and so on. And I thought that was so interesting, that this really ordinary girl, as well as the fact that she was a household name, actually took on Rupert Murdoch and lost. And the reason she lost was because the judge saw a video of her. I don't know if any of you remember this, when she was a drama student and drunk, making a lewd gesture with a cigar for the camera, so said she was a woman with no character to lose. So the Sun got off scot-free, and Gillian owed them £500,000 in damages. That was interesting. And the very other quick one, does anyone remember Pete Bennett, who won Big Brother a few years ago and had Tourette's? That was a challenge. My girls were at the age then when they sort of fell in love with Pete. Well, the whole nation fell in love with Pete because he was absolutely adorable, but he was so foul-mouthed. It was just a delight. But of course, it not only does Tourette's, I thought Tourette's was really interesting because it strikes, I didn't know any of this until I met Pete, but it strikes you in the teens. You're a perfectly normal, probably very creative person. And then suddenly in your teens, it strikes and you become this person that everybody crosses the road to avoid. And that had happened to Pete, and he got a phenomenal drug habit, and his life had completely fallen to pieces. And Big Brother had not only transformed his life, it had transformed the lives of all the other children with Tourette's, because now they were cool because they were like Pete, whereas they used to get stoned in the playground or whatever children do to each other. Suddenly they were, oh God, you're so cool. You're like, oh, go and swear for us, you know. And so when Pete came out, well, A, Tourette's knocks part of your memory out, and B, drugs, ketamine knocks, I don't know if anyone knows, but ketamine knocks the other half of your memory out. So Pete was kind of vague on details about the story. So what the publisher did was they locked us in the Covent Garden Hotel in a suite. And when we arrived, Pete he picked up a thing. He'd never been in a hotel before, and he said, "Well, what's a fucking concierge then?" So I explained what a concierge was, and by the end of the week, he'd run up a room service bill for £3,500 for HarperCollins, which I thought served them right. Am I done? Yes. Thank you very much.